Cold open. Imagine a world where the Olympic Games are celebrated on every continent, where democracy sprouted from soil on 6 continents before Christianity ever took root, where the philosophy of Socrates and Aristotle shaped not just Western thought, but the intellectual foundation of every civilization on Earth. This isn't fantasy, it's a historical possibility that hung by a thread in the 4th century BC. Today, we're asking, what if ancient Greece spread across the entire world? The answer might surprise you, because the world came closer to this outcome than you've ever realized, and understanding how it almost happened reveals something profound about power, destiny, and the fragility of human history. The historical stage. To understand what might have been, we must first understand what actually was. In 338 BC, the Kingdom of Macedon, a rough northern kingdom that most Greeks considered barbaric, defeated the combined armies of Athens and Thebes at the Battle of Chaeronea. This victory placed Macedon's young king, Philip II, in control of all Greece. But Philip was assassinated in 336 BC, leaving the throne to his 20-year-old son, Alexander. Alexander the Great would become history's most rapid empire builder. Between 334 and 323 BC, he conquered 2 million square kilometers across 3 continents. He defeated the Persian Empire, humanity's largest superpower at the time, at Issus and Gaugamela. He pushed into Egypt, Babylon, and India. Everywhere he went, he brought Greek culture, Greek language, Greek ideas. Greek became the lingua franca of the Eastern Mediterranean and Near East. Thousands of Greeks settled in newly founded cities, 70 of them named Alexandria after their conqueror. Philosophy, science, art, and democracy began reshaping societies from Egypt to Central Asia. But here's the crucial fact. Alexander died in Babylon in 323 BC at just 32 years old. His empire fragmented immediately among his generals, and with his death, the relentless momentum of Hellenization, the spread of Greek civilization, slowed dramatically. That momentum could have continued, and if it had, the world we know would be unrecognizable. The Divergence Point. Our divergence point is precise. June 10th or 11th, 323 BC, the day Alexander the Great died. In our timeline, Alexander fell mysteriously ill in Babylon, likely from malaria or typhoid, and succumbed within days. But imagine this. What if Alexander had recovered? What if he'd lived just another 15 or 20 years, into his 50s, with his health intact and his ambition undiminished? Historians know Alexander's plans extended far beyond where he stopped. Ancient sources indicate he intended to march on Rome next, then continue westward, possibly around Africa. He had designs on Arabia. He spoke of circumnavigating the known world, establishing a vast, unified Hellenistic empire bound together by culture, language, and shared governance. But the decision point isn't just his survival, it's what happens after. If Alexander lives, he doesn't merely extend his conquests, he consolidates them. He builds infrastructure, not just empires. He establishes universities, not just garrisons. He creates permanence. If Alexander lives to 50, dying of age rather than fever, his successors inherit not a collapsing empire, but an entrenched, self-perpetuating Hellenistic system. That changes everything. Ripple Effect 1. Immediate aftermath. Let's imagine it's 343 BC in our alternate timeline. Alexander, now 60 years old, finally dies peacefully in Babylon after 5 decades of rule. His empire doesn't shatter. Instead, it fragments according to a clear, established succession plan. His generals, Ptolemy, Seleucus, Antigonus, don't fight a bitter civil war. Instead, they divide the empire into stable Hellenistic dynasties. Within the first decade after his death, Greek continues spreading exponentially. But now it's not through conquest alone, it's through institutional stability. Universities flourish in 50 major cities. Greek becomes not the language of the conqueror, but the language of commerce, science, and administration. It's like Latin would become for Rome, but established 1,000 years earlier. Meanwhile, by 310 BC, the Hellenistic kingdoms make a crucial decision: expansion westward. Without Alexander's death-fracturing authority, the Mediterranean dynasties, particularly the Ptolemies ruling Egypt, sponsor expeditions toward the western Mediterranean and beyond. Greek colonies establish themselves in North Africa, along the Iberian coast, and into the Atlantic. India remains solidly Hellenized through the Seleucid Empire rather than being abandoned. Greek mathematics, astronomy, and philosophy become embedded in Indian intellectual life centuries before our timeline. Greek philosophers and Indian philosophers engage in genuine dialogue, creating hybrid intellectual traditions. Ripple effect 2. Century scale shifts. By 150 BC, now a century into our divergence, the world map is fundamentally altered. The Mediterranean is almost entirely Greek-speaking. Greek city-states dot the coasts of Spain, North Africa, and even Atlantic-facing territories. The Hellenistic kingdoms have grown even wealthier and more technologically sophisticated because they've had a full century of unified, intentional development. Crucially, Rome never rises to supreme power. In our timeline, Rome conquered the Mediterranean by absorbing and imitating Greek culture. But in this timeline, Greek culture never contracted into a vacuum that Rome could fill. Instead of Rome conquering Greece, Greek civilization absorbs Rome early and completely. By 100 BC, Rome itself is thoroughly Hellenized, not conquered militarily, but incorporated culturally and economically into the Hellenistic system. The Latin language exists as a local Italic dialect, not the foundation of an empire. Technology accelerates on a different trajectory. The Hellenistic kingdoms, unified by Greek intellectual culture, share scientific discoveries instantaneously. Advancements in engineering, mathematics, and astronomy develop centuries ahead of our timeline. The steam engine, invented as a toy by Hero of Alexandria in our timeline, becomes a practical tool by 1 AD in this one. Religion takes a different path entirely. Without Rome's rise and eventual adoption of Christianity, different religious systems compete for influence across the Greek world. Greek polytheism, reformed and rationalized through centuries of philosophical development, persists strongly. Buddhism and other Eastern philosophies find welcome audiences in the Hellenized Near East. Christianity, if it emerges at all, does so not as a marginal Jewish sect, but as one competing voice among many in the sophisticated, pluralistic, Hellenistic intellectual marketplace. Ripple effect 3. The modern world that could have been fast-forward to 2024 in our alternate timeline. The world is almost entirely Greek-speaking, not through linguistic imperialism in the crude sense, but because Greek was first, and early linguistic dominance is nearly impossible to dislodge. English isn't the global language of our world because English speakers conquered everyone. It's because English became the language of commerce, science, and culture early. Greek would have done the same, but 2,300 years earlier. Europe never experiences the medieval period as we know it. Without Rome's fall and fragmentation, without the Dark Ages, continuous Greek civilization preserves ancient knowledge. The Renaissance doesn't have to recover classical texts from scattered monasteries. They've never been lost. Universities have operated continuously for 2 millennia. Advancements in mathematics, engineering, and natural philosophy compound uninterrupted. The Industrial Revolution begins in Athens or Alexandria, not Manchester. By 1750, the Greek-speaking world has already developed railways, early computers, and industrial machinery. The technological gap between the Hellenized core and the periphery is even more extreme than our timeline's gap between Europe and Africa. Politically, the world is dominated by a confederation of Greek city-states and Hellenistic kingdoms, some democracies, some monarchies, but all bound by shared culture and language. Nation-states as we know them never solidify. The concept of the nation-state emerges differently, if at all, because Greek political philosophy emphasizes the polis and empire simultaneously, not nationalist exclusivity. China and the Americas develop independently, but Greek merchants and explorers reach them earlier. By 1400 AD in this timeline, Greek colonies exist on every continent, not through military domination, but through the same cultural magnetism that made Greek culture attractive to Romans, Egyptians, and Persians. Today, you'd be speaking Greek, not English. International business, science, and diplomacy all operate in Athenian Greek, with regional dialects and modern innovations, but mutually intelligible across the world. The United Nations operates in Greek. Nobel Prize acceptance speeches are delivered in Greek. The internet's first language is Greek. Closing reflection. This thought experiment reveals something humbling about history. The world we inhabit might be a fragile accident. Imagine, Alexander lives another 20 years. One man, one person's immune system, one fever that doesn't take hold, and the entire trajectory of human civilization cascades into an entirely different world. We often think of history as inevitable, as though Western domination, the rise of Rome, the primacy of English were written in the stars. But they weren't. They were contingent, fragile, products of specific moments and choices that could have gone differently. The Greek world of this alternate timeline isn't necessarily better or worse than ours. It's simply different. It retained the wisdom of the ancients without the trauma of collapse and rebirth. It experienced progress as continuation rather than rediscovery, and it reminds us that our world, with all its languages, nations, and conflicts, might have been entirely other. That's not a reason to despair, but to marvel. The world is not destiny, it's consequence. And consequence can change on a single breath.